I'm Charles Cook with Arrowverse Streaming, and I'm here to talk to you today about the continuation of the story me and Jeff Rowland are telling you about how Arrowverse came about. And we're still in the early stages of it, and I've talked to you about my grandfather, my wife's grandfather, our two fathers, how we went and bought a cub, but I hadn't soloed, so now we're getting to the point of the story where I actually started learning to fly. So at the age of 14, I had flying on the brain, and my dad comes home one day, and he had learned that at the age of 14 you could solo in sailplanes, and he was pretty excited about it. And he goes, "We're going to send you out to a sailplane glider port for the summer. We've just got to figure out where, and you're going to learn to fly in sailplanes, and you're going to be a much better pilot learning in that than a power plane." Well, this was very intriguing to me because I knew sailplanes were big over in Europe, and for a split second that's where my parents looked for sending someone for the summer to go fly sailplanes, and I was very excited about that. But the minute they looked into it, they found out the leading sailplane pilot in the world was just east of Dallas, which we lived in Fort Worth, on Caddo Mills glider port. And his name was Derek Piggott, if you ever look that up. And Derek Piggott was over at Caddo Mills for the summer to do nothing but certify a Falke motor glider for training in the United States Sailplane Association. Well, for me, that was a big letdown because I wanted to go to Europe. But my parents called over to Caddo Mills, and the deal even got better. I got to live in a little short trailer for the summer with the job of hooking up sailplanes to the tow plane, and I would get a lesson in the evening from Derek Piggott. And if you get a chance, look up his name. Very distinguished guy. So I had never actually spent the night away from our farm my entire life. This was a big adventure for me. So we bought some clothes. My parents bought me about 4 bags of groceries and drove me out to the middle of nowhere and dumped me out at this glider port that didn't have anything on it but 2 trailers and then the actual hangar the gliders were in. And it was AC and Mary Williams ran it, and it's still one of the finer points of my childhood was working out there that summer and getting to know them. And they lived over by a lake, and I would stay out there by myself and Derek Piggott, and he lived in the trailer house right next to me. And so in addition to getting to live on the airport for the summer, my next door neighbor was Derek Piggott, and in the evening we would cook and just tell airplane stories. And he was an epic World War II glider pilot. He flew gliders during the war. After the war, he was in several movies like The Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines. And then he also had set many sailplane records, and very, very interesting guy. One of the most interesting things I've done. But his primary purpose over there, like I said, was to bring this thing called a Falke into the Soaring Society of America. And this is actually what I took my very first flying lessons in, was a Falke motor glider. And this is actually a Super Falke. So this is an improvement on the one I flew. It's got a little bit longer wing on it, a little bit different tail, and the longer wing allows this to have a higher glide ratio than the one I flew. The one I flew was truly right in between a glider and a sailplane. This one actually will hit sailplane numbers. And it's a longer wing, and as you can see, the wing folds, and this wing, when it's fully out, is 60 feet from tip to tip. And as you can see, the one I flew in this one, they both have this feature right here. This is called a pogo stick. And what it does is this keeps a student, or really the regular pilot, from putting the wing on the ground, because as you can see, this is just like most sailplanes, only has a center landing gear. So when you're on that, the wingtip is going to rest on the ground without those pogo sticks. Now, a true sailplane doesn't have pogo sticks, but this is a motor glider. So what you get out of this is you can fly like a sailplane without the necessity of the tow plane. And this will pull itself up into the air, and then the idea is you kill the motor, and then there's a lever in there, and you pull the lever, and the propeller streamlines to reduce the drag. And if you get into a problem, you release the lever, and the propeller goes back into that position, and you restart the motor, and you fly off to the airport. Well, what we would do is Derek and I would get in this sailplane, and we would climb up to 3,000 feet AGL. We would kill the motor and then start flying as a glider. And that is how I started to learn to fly. And this was, I don't know if it was me or the Falke, but it was a bit awkward at first. The coordination on it is how I remember it. And I think that was probably because more I was a student than an issue with the airplane. And I learned to fly it, and I always felt the one I flew out at Kettle Mills was nose heavy. Well, from that, I began to learn how to trim the airplane. I learned the trimming and how to trim the airplane to neutral, which really paid off in a lot of the flying I did later on. So I have a very soft spot for a Falke. And this is a friend of mine's that's here on what we call the home airport for Arrowverse. And he keeps it out here, and I'm very intrigued with this because, as I said, they're European made. They're slightly rare in the US, yet it's actually what I took my first flying lessons in. And from this, I got about 8 to 10 flights in a Falke, and then I moved on to a Schweitzer 233, which was a true sailplane in that it had to be hooked to a tow plane with a rope and towed up. So that was the next step in it. And Derek checked me out in the 233, and I got about 4 more flights in that, and then I soloed at the age of 14 in sailplanes and became a sailplane pilot. And I spent the whole summer out there flying sailplanes and really learning the very basics of flying. And it was some of the most beautiful flying I ever did. It was around cumulus clouds, thermals, low energy. You learned a lot of low energy maneuvers, and it still intrigues me very much to this day. And the Soaring Society of America was who kind of ran that at the time. They're still around, and they're still one of the greatest aviation organizations in the country. So if you ever decide to get into sailplane flying, look into the Soaring Society of America, because they are there to help you learn how to engage in this type of flying. Now, one of the things I didn't mention about sailplanes, and it's one of the most fun parts of it, isn't the actual flying of the sailplane, it's the community effort that it takes to fly the sailplane. Because this you can do by yourself if you have the wherewithal, because it has an engine up there to pull itself into the air. But a true sailplane, you have to have a tow pilot, a tow plane. You have to have a line boy, is what they're called, to hook the sailplane up to bring it out to the flight line and hook to the tow plane, and then you have to be in it. Well, when I was doing it, the wives and children were all out there cooking lunch and retrieving gliders to keep the whole thing in motion. And this group experience was very, very fun to do. It's a community effort instead of an individual effort. And I cannot say enough good things about sailplane flying. So that was the next step in where I went. And we'll cover a little bit more of that on the next issue of this. But right now, main point is, here's a Falke. You see what it looks like. This is what I soloed in. I'll show you a picture next time of me when I was 14 flying this thing. So we're going to end it there. Thank you for watching, and tune in to Arrowverse, arrowverse.com, streaming. It's the greatest aviation app on the internet. Thank you. All right.
Charles leaving out something very important about himself. I had the pleasure of flight training a couple of guys that trained in gliders first. Incredible pilots. There's no words I can use to describe someone that comes out of the sailplane world into the powerplane world. They're tremendous pilots. It was almost boring. And one other quick vignette, I remember I took my son over when he was, you can solo at 14, right?
Right.
I took him, he was closing in on 14, he's 13. I took him to Caddo Mills. We actually lived out there near them. I said, you need to fly a sailplane. I call them gliders, but they're actually sailplanes.
Right.
And so he flew our J3 over and his 13-year-old skills, and they were okay. He's taking off and landing by now. And we land, and he meets up with, I think it was Joe Abernathy or some guy like that, was instructing there, and they had what was that sailplane they used, that two-place Grobe?
Oh, Grobe, yeah.
And Max went up for his first lesson, and Joe was very complimentary because he had already knew how to fly a little bit, and he was real procedural oriented. I remember watching him, I'm like, wow, he's putting this out and doing all this cool stuff.
Right.
And checking everything. But anyway, at the first lesson, we flew home. He was an absolutely different pilot that day.
Yeah.
His attention on the rudder finally took command of it.
Right.
And Charles was saying how it flew a little different, this thing. Well, I can imagine they're not really like regular airplanes. This gigantic aspect ratio, it takes a ton of rudder. That's why guys become such great pilots.
Yeah.
They come out of gliders because they're using that rudder.
Yeah.
Like it's meant to be used. And so I don't want Charles to shortchange himself in this. He became the pilot he is because of that training. I was very fortunate, but I didn't get to fly gliders. I got to tow them a bunch. But starting in the Cub and starting with a guy that wasn't a World War II guy, he taught me the action of the rudder and how important it was. But nobody learns it like a glider pilot. Charles was very fortunate, and I'm telling you, it turned him into the pilot he is.
Yeah, I was very fortunate in that I learned in sailplanes. Derek Piggott was my instructor. There's another fortunate thing. And I'm saving this for the next one, but in the sailplanes, when I have a picture to show you how big I was, I'm going to say I was 15 at the time. I thermaled a sailplane up to 18,000 feet. And the very next day, I stayed up 6 hours in a sailplane. And that was at the age of 15. And that's pretty stout stuff when you think, hey, I was towed up to 1,500 feet, cut loose, and I was on my own. In fact, I'll even talk about my first solo next time. So that's where we're going with this. Thank you for watching.